Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this weekend's edition of BookBytes on Salam Media. I'm your host, Shafinaaz Hassim, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Ismail Vadi on today's show. Dr. Vadi is a well-known South African political activist, anti-apartheid activist, former member of parliament, and Gauteng MEC. And Dr. Vadi has written his memoir, which is partially a political documentation, a historical document, and a family narrative of an important legacy creation. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Vadi, and welcome on the show.
Shafinaaz, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, it's such a pleasure to have you, to finally have the chance to speak to you about your book.
Yes, you were ill when we were supposed to have this interview sometime last year, I think. I hope you've recovered now.
Alhamdulillah, I think, coming through a pandemic, we have so much to be thankful for. There's so many families and clans who have suffered losses, and we make shukr to Allah for good health, continued good health, inshallah.
Good.
There's another thing about the pandemic is I'm finding, especially as a book reviewer, and I've said this, it takes courage to do so, is that a lot of memoir has come out of it, various kinds, family memoirs, personal memoirs, in your case, a political memoir, an important document, I thought, as I read it. In some ways, very anecdotal, but in some ways, you document the process through the struggle and the last quarter of a decade of struggling through and building our way through this growth of a new regime. Talk to us about the writing process and obviously your vision for penning this memoir.
Well, I've been writing on political history, liberation history. Before this, I just published a book through the Katwada Foundation on the Naidu family, 4 generations of the Naidu family from the time of Gandhi right through to the most recent, the younger generation of the family. So there is a political history, a family history. And then, it was Professor Ghulam Wahid who's been telling me, but why don't you write about yourself? I think I don't want to talk too much about myself in terms of, in literary form. But what was important was to try and document the early years of the transition to democracy and really the energy and the momentum of parliament in the first 5 or 10 years. I mean, those years will never come back because we had to dismantle all the apartheid laws, remove them from the statute books, and in a sense, create a whole new legal edifice. And so this book is really not about the sort of dry history of Parliament, etc. And I've deliberately made it anecdotal so that it's lively. It covers a lot of the people there. Some of the people have passed on, some have retired, and it's just to reflect on sort of the person interactions, the kind of people that you've come to meet from different political parties from all over the country. So it was a unique experience. It will never be recreated. Those 5 years, 1994 to 1999, for example, and even the 5 years after that, I mean, there's no way history can recreate those years. There was a uniqueness to it, as I said, a tremendous energy, a passion that I don't necessarily see in Parliament or in the legislatures today. So it was important to document that. And of course, through that, a little bit about my own work in Parliament and some of our personal experiences come through as well.
I noticed, as much as there's the political, there's the personal, and there's personal anecdotes about the interactions of the comrades, and that energy comes through in the initial sessions. But there's also the personal experiences of loss. There's a beautiful story you tell about Balina who doesn't eat at the member of parliament's lounge, and he insists on buying from the canteen. The humility of activists such as yourself comes through. Those stories are very important to us as readers, as ordinary people, the common reader. And so thank you for putting that together, for pulling that together. But there's also some sad stories. I didn't know about, the loss of the Cotwell family's little boy, for example. So you
Yeah.
write about those.
Yeah, so I mean, Zunaid and Roweda Kotwal, I mean, there was a young couple that came from Piet Retief, and they were living in the parliamentary village. Um, there were three villages in that the members of parliament used to live in, and they were put in one of them, and there are two young boys, and it was it was Ramadan. I remember very clearly. It was towards the evening, just before iftar, and I get this frantic call from Zunaid Kotwal. I mean, almost in tears. You can hear it in his voice, and say, "What's wrong?" And he says, my Hussein. And I said, "What? I mean, my Muhammad. What?" I said, "What's wrong?" And he says, "He's drowned in the parliamentary pool." Now, it's not something that you expect. I mean, there's parliamentary security, there are police there offering protection, but the pool was really poorly maintained. The kids, him and his brother and one other youngster, they were out collecting insects for a school project. And this youngster, I mean, the pool was very dirty. The gate latch was broken, and they walked in and he fell into the pool. And the other two couldn't even see him. That's how dirty the parliamentary pool was. And by the time one or two of the adults came there, I mean, the youngster had already passed on. So I mean, these are today we almost forget those stories. There's Firoza Adam. I mean, she was really one of the
Yes.
most vibrant young activists that we had in the UDF and the Transvaal Congress from Fordsburg. I mean, she was really a live wire. We were at university together, a vivacious character, and passionate about women's rights and women's empowerment, etc. So we got sworn in as members of parliament early in May. Remember, the elections were on the April 27th, and a few days after that, in May, we got sworn in. And one evening in August, so it was probably 5 or 6 months really. I get this call from one of the old veterans from the Women's League, and she says Firoza is gone. So I said, "Gone away?" I mean, it was just towards the evening, and she was taking an off ramp there at Vanguard Avenue in Cape Town, very near the big Vanguard shopping mall. And for some reason, she swerved in onto the right lane, so it seems, and the car hit her head on. And she within a few days, I mean, she was basically on a ventilator, on a life support system, and the family had to make a very big decision about whether they switch off the machine. But I mean, she was in a vegetative state, and they took the decision then to pull the plug in a sense. And Firoza was gone. I mean, it was as simple as and as quick as that. And you suddenly realize, I mean, you think you're in parliament and you coming to change the world, and then your life gets snuffed out like that. It cuts you down to size. It makes you realize that we are all mortal beings, um, and we must serve as best as we can. And earlier on, you spoke about Berliner. I mean, Berliner was really a veteran from the Italian Congress in the 1940s and 50s, a very prominent trade unionist in the South African Congress of Trade Unions. He joined the ANC underground when Umkhonto was banned, and then was given a sentence of 20 years in Robben Island. Even after his release, I mean, we looked out at him in awe. I mean, he was a senior in our ranks. He'd met with us in the Transvaal Congress very often. And then Billy came to Parliament. During the state of emergency, he had to go into underground. And then eventually Billy came to Parliament. So we've got this beautiful parliamentary restaurant. There are 3 or 4 restaurants, but this one overlooks the presidential gardens, the Teenhays. And in the background, we've got Table Mountain, and there's a beautiful glass patio that you can see the entire garden, the presidential garden, and the mountain. So it was very popular. I mean, if ever you got a visitor, you'll take them to that restaurant. So we got there, all the silver cutlery and all the ladies that were and people were serving us, etc. It was a bit of an unusual feeling. But after a while, I mean, I was on the 4th floor, the floor that is now burnt in the parliamentary precinct. My office was there right next to the staff restaurant. And I one day just wanted to get a sandwich and went in there, and I see Uncle Bill. He obviously had a limp, so with his crutch, he's standing in the queue there. And I said, "Well, what's wrong? Why are you here in the staff restaurant? Go down to the members restaurant." And he's blunt. He was very sharp. Well, he was very blunt and sharp. And he says, "Buti," because that's how he referred to young activists. I'm a communist. I'm a trade unionist, and I'm a revolutionary. And I eat with the staff of this institution. And all the years that he was there, I mean, he got his meals in the polystyrene tub. stood in the queue, the staff would feel embarrassed because they would say, member, please, honorable member, go past and you're an elder. And he would just refuse. He'd stand in the queue, pay like an ordinary worker, get his meal, and they had all the staff tables with those plastic tablecloths, nothing fancy. And Billy would sit there and eat with a plastic spoon and a plastic fork and knife. I mean, really. And that was his humility. He did that for 10 years that he was in parliament. So it's a remarkable, quality and trait. And suddenly, if you look at sometimes the parliamentarians, I'm not saying all of them, but some of them today, there's a kind of arrogance, a haughtiness, and aloofness, which I don't think encapsulates the values of the liberation movement. I'm not saying it's that ANC members are necessarily guilty, but if you look at parliamentary proceedings sometimes on television, and you suddenly come to realize, that the aura, the stature, the dignity of the House seems to have diminished somewhat, and the behavior and conduct of some of the members of Parliament, it's just heckling, disruptiveness, and you wonder, is this the kind of democracy that we really fought for? And is this the essence of the democratic process, which is really your parliament?
And I think it's important. Books like these actually give us a sense. That's why I speak to it as the Political Backbencher is a historical document, but at the same time, I'm enamored by the obvious display of humility and the ethos of coming through the movement and understanding exactly what the struggle was about and what the work that lay ahead was. And it's terrible to be able to look back and say what's been accomplished. We know as commoners on the ground that there are political backbenchers, but men and women on the ground who are working so hard behind the scenes and in the legislature, and yet there has been corruption. We've seen the effects of it throughout our society. How, perhaps it's a personal question, but I mean, what does it feel like to be able to look back and say, has it been handed over properly in the right hands? Books like yours are obviously an important reminder for those of us left to do the work, that the work is still meant to be done in certain ways, or whatever the case might be. And you actually speak about how easy it is. You speak about the passion of Parliament, but how easy it is for people to kind of lose their cool and just kind of throw their toys out the cot, even in Parliament. How are these forces negotiated, and how do we come to resolutions that are sustainable and that can make a positive change and a positive difference in society, especially because we're dealing with the effects of corruption and that sort of thing as well?
I think there were a number of very serious allegations, even in the early years in Parliament. For example, we had a former minister that had come through the National Party ranks, and he, in the Mandela administration, he was appointed as a Minister of Social Development. And in a very short while, in a matter of 2 or 3 years, there were serious allegations that were really emanating from his time when he was the minister in the old House of Representatives in the tricameral Parliament. But I mean, that investigation was done very swiftly by the police and the investigation authorities. He was prosecuted and found guilty. And to the credit of the National Party then, they removed him from his post. And he eventually went and served the sentence. So this was really in the Mandela administration. We're talking of the first 2 or 3 years. Subsequently, we had, a number of other allegations. The biggest one really was the allegations surrounding the arms deal. And there, I think, if I look back, all of us were seriously concerned because it was really the opposition parties that were bringing the information to the fore. The media was putting the ANC on a massive defensive on this issue, and all of us were seriously concerned about what are the allegations, what's the truth of the matter, etc. So SCOPA, that is the Standing Committee on Public Accounts in Parliament, and Isuchiba from Lens, he was really very close to us. I was sitting next to him, or I sat next to him for 10 years in Parliament. He was right next to me all the time, and really a veteran and senior. He with Barbara Hogan, a number of others served on SCOPA, and they took a decision that this warrants a full-scale investigation. which they, as Parliament, as SCOPA, took a resolution and got the investigation to come through. So they had asked for, at that time, it was the Heath Commission of Inquiry, and then the Auditor General, and they managed to get that resolution through to Parliament. But then, in the nature of politics, I mean, the ANC caucus took a decision that there's no need for the Heath, for Judge Heath to be involved in this investigation, and it was good enough for the Auditor General to do that. And the Auditor General was Shaukat Faki. I mean, he was really a matter of pride from the community. He came through as the first major Auditor General from the democratic ranks, and he conducted, I think, quite an efficient investigation. But when he submitted the preliminary report apparently to Cabinet, they had then made certain interventions which seemed to have diluted the overall impact and effect of the report, or so it seemed at that stage, and that became a whole new controversy. But the truth of the matter is that we who were in the ANC benches, I think we were too trusting of our leaders then. We accepted what they said at face value, and the arms deal is haunting us till today. If you want to understand the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, you have to go back to the arms deal. And it's now, almost 15 years or more, that finally the former president of our country, Jacob Zuma, is being charged. And I don't know when the case is coming on. It has been remanded and postponed on a number of occasions. And there have been any number of court cases that he has gone to avoid getting to this point where he's formally charged around the arms deal. But I mean, the writing was on the wall then already. But in the nature of the politics, the ANC closed ranks. And, Andrew Feinstein was a member of the ANC. He served on SCOPA. And in protest, when the ANC tried to sort of, I wouldn't say scuttle, but to curb and narrow the scope of the inquiry, he resigned from Parliament in protest. And all of us were quite shocked. I mean, because he's with us on the benches, and suddenly he left, and subsequently he's published a book called After the Party, where he exposes all the intricate workings of the behind the scenes working of the ANC on this matter. But if we had confronted it forthrightly then, we would have avoided a lot of what has happened subsequently. So that was, I would say, the first test around a major, corruption scandal and allegations around that. And as I said, it's still with us today. Subsequently, of course, in the last 10 years, corruption has really hit the roof. And we now have systemic corruption, not an isolated case of corruption, but corruption in the systemic form where extensively private sector individuals working with some elements of the public service, possibly even some politicians, and taking procurement decisions which are in the interests of a very small core of allegedly corrupt individuals. And that's what the Zondo Commission has now uncovered. It is now, I think, almost a given fact that the allegation of state capture is true. And Zondo has now marshaled, extensive evidence to that effect. The Zondo Commission, the 3 reports that have been published, goes into 8.5 million pages almost. The public is not aware of that. So out of this, we're likely to see a whole string of prosecutions and charges against public servants, business people, and possibly even politicians. But the writing was on the wall, as I said earlier on, except that we chose not to see it, and we now live with the drastic consequences of that.
Dr. Vadi, you even you speak about the stack of emails that former President Motlanthe received, which were considered possibly fake emails that led to the splintering, should we say, of the ANC, and that that goes back a few years, obviously. And so, could we say that the scene was set for corruption to, for the seeds to be sown for corruption purely on the basis that there was so much of this internal fracturing? I wonder. You also, I think your humility comes through so interestingly when you choose a title like the Political Backbencher, but at the same time, you had great influence in various ways, both in the education sector, during your tenure there and as MEC of Transport. And I want to thank you on the platform as well for the work that you've done to bring South Africa through, through the as part of one of the major activists, but especially for the work that you've done during your tenure as a member of Parliament and as on the Gauteng Executive Council as well. We don't have a lot more time, but we'd love to hear a few parting words from you about what you expect for this book. And I hope that many young people will be reading it, because I think as much as it's a reminder of history for those who know the history, I think that our next generation will really find this as a form of knowledge basis from this book.
Yeah. Look, I think the book is written in a very simple style. As I said, I've avoided sort of hard history, and therefore I've deliberately made it anecdotal. So there are short stories, 2 or 3 pages, 4 pages at most, a bit more on one or two other things, a bit more extensive. The idea is really to give a set of values and principles to younger people, to showcase the transitional period, and hopefully to inspire younger generations. So we have an array of activists working in civil society organizations. Not many want to work within political parties anymore, particularly from our community. I can say that because there are not many. So the activism is taking place outside of the establishment, outside of political parties. But at the end of the day, politics is important. It affects us in every way, whether it is the street light that's not working, or the potholes that haven't been repaired, or the economy, or unemployment, or crime. I mean, it's all linked ultimately to politics, and we can't disengage as a community. And therefore, let me say, as a retired or political has-been, my job is to try and inspire a younger generation of people to take an active interest in politics, to become a politician over time, and to work selflessly. That's really what it is: selflessly, with passion, with commitment, in the interest of the public, in the interest of the people, not just the Muslim community, but all the people of our country, and particularly the poor. There are many, many poor people. And if we can inspire one or two from our community to still take on the challenge of political activism, political leadership, they will grow into their own leaders over time. We were not born as leaders. We were involved in the struggle against apartheid. I never had a clue that I'll ever get to parliament, let alone see freedom in my lifetime. But Allah has made that available to us and given us this great fortune of working in parliament. I mean, I can't believe it's 25 years that have passed in a public sort of career. And that was never part of my thinking or planning in life. So if we can inspire a younger generation, it's important. Many of our older leaders, if I take, say, Dr. Vasil Saluji, Ahmad Katwala, Isu Chiba, Dr. Jasad is very old, Mozi Mullah, Abdullah Jasad, there's a whole lot of them. Some have passed on, some of them are really at an advanced age. And we look to them as role models, but they don't have the energy anymore, the health and the time to inspire another generation. So I suppose that responsibility rests on our shoulders, and we do as much as we can to inspire people. There's a lot of hope on the horizon. If I look at the work that we do in the Ahmed Katwada youth clubs, tremendous amount of youthful energy across the different, on a non-racial basis, a whole new generation of leaders emerging. And they will choose their own fights, and they will determine their own struggles and shape their own destinies.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair for the time that you've given us, for the book that you've written. It's an important book for your family, for our community, for our nation. And we wish you everything of the best with your ventures in the future. We hope to chat to you again sometime. I hope you continue writing, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Wa
barakatuh.
alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And that was Dr. Ismail Vadi, former Gauteng MEC for Transport, who has written his book, The Political Backbencher. Make sure you get a copy, have one on every bookshelf, and keep your young ones reading about our history. And that's it from me for this week's Book Bites on Salam.